these are moments to applaud our achievements in the community, applaud the honorees, but I think it's also important to recognize these as moments of inspiration, because frankly, we did not grow up with many role models in America doing the things that we ended up doing.
No, I mean, I heard about Sammy Lee, the diver, about like 400 times in my childhood, because there just wasn't, you know, as an athlete, you didn't, and then subsequently as a physician, there just weren't very many.
So I think that this is also an opportunity for us to recognize that these are inspirational role models, and that's why I'm so grateful to the Council of Korean Americans to include Korean Americans in media this time, and for us to have the chance to get to know you, Will, as the Chief Operating Officer of NPR. I mean, I did see that press release, and it was like, hot damn, we have somebody so high up at NPR, and I'm a total NPR nerd. So I am going to, we are going to leave some time for questions, and I will let you know and encourage you. I think there's a microphone there. I will let you know when we're getting ready to ask questions, so think of some good ones for Will. And I will say that I want to start with having you, because I didn't give you a proper intro. I didn't realize I was going to. So just tell us, what does that mean to be the Chief Operating Officer of NPR? What do you
I wonder every day in some respects what it is that I do, but I'm told that is actually a good thing. And by the way, let's just one more time just recognize Julia. Like, you know, when I was 22, I was not doing that, just to be clear. To be very clear. So, I mean, amazing. It's really great. And that is, I mean, Julia is so emblematic of why this day is so great. And it really, like, sort of fills me with a great deal of sort of irrationally emotional about this, because to see the progression of, you know, when my parents came in the late 60s and the things that they aspired to and the things that they aspired to for us, and then for them to be able, for us to have a gold medal, you know, snowboarder. Snowboarding didn't even exist when I was a kid, you know, and what, you know, it's 2 or 3 of the most famous chefs in the world, and, you know, again, not something that I think my parents would ever have thought would happen, and, you know, go on down the line, actors, Oscar-nominated films. And, you know, and then to see you and the example that you're setting for your peers, and also the inspiration that you're giving the rest of us, is amazing. So thank you. Yeah. So as Jean noted, I am the Chief Operating Officer of NPR. So I'd say it's sort of a non-traditional Chief Operating Officer role. You know, the accountants and the, you know, finance people and the legal people do not report into me, but I'm largely tasked with two really important things: the strategy of NPR, you know, looking out into the future, seeing around the corners, and understanding what we need to be doing, and then working with our stations in a really, you know, NPR is made up of 249 member stations across the country, WAMU here, WNYC in New York, and many others, and working with them very intentionally and very, you know, very closely to help, you know, foster the mission and continue to do the work we do together. And so those are two of the biggest priorities. And so I spend a lot of my time. And then another part of my role is also the transformation of NPR into a fully digital, multi-platform, platform agnostic, if you will, media company, right? Because we are a broadcast radio company at our core, and of course we're much more into podcasting. We really invented the genre in many ways. So we, you know, so making that transformation is a really important part of what I do as well.
So I do want to ask if working at NPR was always on your bucket list, your professional goals. Did young Will Lee, growing up in Decatur, Illinois, which is what you told me, you grew up in Decatur, which is what, southern Illinois?
Well, if you ask somebody from Chicago, they'll tell you it's downstate.
Okay.
Which, you know, but it is in central Illinois, very close to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign.
Did you even grow up hearing NPR?
Well, so funny, it's an interesting origin story. To answer your question directly, I don't think I ever even imagined that NPR would be in my future. However, I did grow up in Central Illinois. The NPR station in Central Illinois is at the University of Illinois, and the call letters are WILL. Okay. Let that sit there for a second. And so I did make my mother and father contribute so that I would get all of the swag, like all the stuff, the coffee mugs, didn't even drink coffee, all of the T-shirts, and in fact they got a director's chair. I don't know how much I had to pay to get that pledge gift. So anyway, I loved the station. I listened to it. The FM station was a classical music station. The AM station was a news station, and it had a PBS affiliate as well. It was a PBS affiliate as well. So yes, I did grow up with NPR, and I grew up. You know, we have a term at NPR we call some of us backseat babies. People who grew up with NPR because you rode around in the car and your parents had it on all the time, and that was definitely me.
How many of you are backseat babies?
Yeah, curious.
I mean, okay, this is maybe a generational thing. Now we're giving our age away. I would come out of my piano lessons, and at that moment that I would get into the car, NPR, All Things Considered, would come on, and Robert Siegel was the host at the time. He's now retired. The first time I did an interview with him, he had me on the show. I was blown away. I was like, oh my God, you're real. Like, you know, I thought you were just a voice coming out of my dad's radio. Yeah,
it's a funny thing about being at NPR, and I have a couple colleagues here, Salen Hong and Vincent, who I just met, who's now our new Asia editor. And one of the interesting things about being at NPR is that you listen to these people for so long, and when you see them, it's, you know, I used to work in celebrity media, so I'm used to, you know, seeing celebrities on red carpets and at parties and so forth. And I can tell you for sure, I've never been more starstruck than when I met, you know, some of the voices, you know, Steve Inskeep and Layla Fadel and Mary Louise Kelly. I mean, it is really quite startling. So, which actually means we should just get them out there more and their faces out there more because people really want to see them. So, getting back to your question, so I grew up in Central Illinois with my NPR station there. Loved it. Have listened. You know, anytime I've been anywhere in the United States, whether it was in Providence, Rhode Island, or Exeter, New Hampshire, or New York, or Santa Monica, California, any place that I've lived, I've always turned to the NPR station for information, for inspiration, for entertainment, and for news, obviously, for the journalism. And so what really appealed to me about NPR was the fact that, you know, I was such an avid consumer. But interestingly, you know, when I got there, you know, my path there was very much not through news in the way that you did, or journalism in the way you did it. Prior to NPR, I was at the Meredith Corporation, where I oversaw the digital businesses for People and Entertainment Weekly, the magazine brands, and I also I was at the Hollywood Reporter. And my first job in media was actually at Entertainment Weekly, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But so it wasn't a conventional path to NPR, and I often say I'm like an embryo in 4 ways at NPR. I'm embryonic because, you know, people work at NPR for a very long time, as well as in public media. But, you know, I'm an embryo because I've never worked at NPR. I'm new to public radio. I'm new to public media, and I'm new to broadcast radio. So in a lot of ways, I'm I come with a very fresh perspective, very fresh eyes, and so it's been really fun. It's been really rewarding.
I did want to mention that we have Lucian Kim. Lucian, you're here somewhere, right? Who is the former NPR Moscow bureau chief.
Lucian,
so another Korean-American name that I also recognize listening to NPR and his dispatches from Ukraine and Moscow.
Amazing reporter. Yeah.
Russia. So I'm curious. Did you always intend to go this direction? Did you intend to go into journalism and media when you graduated?
Interesting.
From college?
So, you know, it turns out that there was sort of a familial connection. My paternal grandfather was the head of the Korean broadcasting system at the time of the Korean War broke out, and of course, you know, you will all know that had real consequences because the North Koreans effectively thought, you know, spreading propaganda. So he was actually, you know, really a wanted man, and so my father and his siblings and my grandparents, you know, had to basically be in hiding for a very long time during the war. Beyond that, my maternal grandfather was the publisher of one of the dailies in Seoul, as a matter of fact. And so it turns
Are
out
we
that there was
related?
media in the, what's that?
Are we related?
I know, you'll have to tell me. So yes, we could be.
Always a risk when you're
yes,
doing
exactly. So that was, so it turns out that there was sort of media in my blood. Now, it wasn't something that I was pushed towards, because it skipped a generation. On my dad's family was, 3 dermatologists and 3 PhD scientists, of course. So, that's the way it goes. And so, up until a certain point, I just felt like I was going to go into the family business, which was, skincare. But it actually, I sort of got the bug pretty early on. We did consume a lot of media, a lot of print media, and I loved the newspaper. I loved, the local NPR station. So I really wanted to pursue that. I was, did various stints as editors of papers in my schools and so forth. And, I found it really energizing. So what did I do when I graduated from college? I went to go work in finance, of course, right? Which didn't last very long, and I took my first job at, my first media job at Entertainment Weekly. And what's interesting about my first job at Entertainment Weekly, and particularly germane to this room, is that the guy who I worked for is a guy named Albert Kim, and Korean American, and who is now a showrunner at Netflix. One of his bosses was a woman named Jeannie Park, who some of you, I'm sure, know, who has been incredibly influential for many years and a great supporter and champion of Asian American journalists. And one of my colleagues at Time Inc. at the time was a woman named Janice Min. She was the editor of Life, and so as many of you know, she became the editor of Us Weekly and The Hollywood Reporter, which is where I worked with her as well. And we've stayed friends. So it's just fascinating. And so, there was a pretty high concentration. There was another woman named Sana Chang, who also worked at Entertainment Weekly at the time. So there's this high concentration of Korean Americans, and I was like, oh, this is great. Media is fantastic, in this way. And then it just got much, much worse, right? And to the point where when I was at the Meredith Corporation, I was one of 2 executives of color out of 34, right? Not Korean American, right? Really what happened, I think, in the last 3 or 4 years is that there's been a lot more attention, but it took a global pandemic and incredible racial injustice to help to get media people to think more intentionally about that. And so I've always tried to keep that diversity, equity, inclusion, and really Korean Americans in the forefront. But it's been difficult, I will admit. It's been very challenging. And Salen, for instance, is another member of the executive team at NPR, and it's really great to work with her. But I think we still find that every day you really have to make it part of your priority set.
I mean, how do you understand the lack of diversity or the sort of drop-off in the number of Korean Americans in media during that period? I mean, I'm asking this partially because you and I were very similar. My paternal grandfather was editor of the Hangulilbo, the Korea Times.
Oh, wow.
So he was a journalist, also did some propaganda for the South Korean government. And so my father, who's a neurologist, I was one of those kids who had a Fisher-Price medical kit at the age of 4. He was grooming me to become a surgeon. And he couldn't really protest because I have journalism in my blood on the other side of the family, but similar to you. But I think he was always very worried that that was not going to be a stable career. And it really isn't, to be honest. It is. Journalism has gone through so much. It is not the same. It is not the same industry as it was when I started.
No,
it's evolved a lot, which is something I want to talk to you about.
Yeah, sure.
But do you think that there's been a kind of, after this first wave, and I'm so glad you mentioned people like Jeannie Park and Janice Min, who really, a couple of years older than me, my generation, but real trailblazers. Yeah. Was there a drop-off, do you think? Were we not out there?
It's a good question. I think, I do think a lot of people in our age group, I think we're fairly similar in age, you know, there were the kind of dual gold rushes of finance, you know, and you know, investment banking jobs, and people who did well in school, in college, you know, ended up getting those jobs, went to go work there, and also, you know, internet, you know, so internet, that all of the many jobs at Google, Facebook, and so forth. I think it may have sucked up some of the talent, but to be honest, I think it was just having, you know, leadership at these companies that just frankly didn't care, right? And they did not want to build a bench, right, of people and cultivate that talent. And I am happy to say that at NPR we are doing I think a really good job of cultivating talent of color, talent, you know, Korean Americans, Asian Americans generally, and encouraging them to keep going and keep you know, building to be more influential and to really take different jobs. I mean, not just journalism jobs, not just, but you know, in my case, you know, more business side things as well. So I think it's important for us to really, you know, understand what the horizons are. And you know, part of our role, I think, and many people in this room, our role is to you know, what's the expression? You know, you have to see it to be it. And I think you have to be out there talking to people, and this is why this organization is so great. And you know, I've gotten to know Abe a bit. I'll say being at the gala a couple months ago was like you know, my wife and I are still purring blissfully about it, because it was so inspirational and so magical in a way that you know, it was a room that I had never been in before. You know, like just like that. You know, and so so I think in terms of how we, you know, we have influence, not just in a largely non-Korean or non-Asian world. I think you have to be out there. You have to be very vocal, and you have to show younger people what it is that they can do.
I do want to pick up on what you're talking about in terms of the business side of journalism. We're so familiar with who we see on TV, the very public part of journalism, but you represent somebody who has really excelled at that other side, and I'm going to mention a couple things. So you were at, was it Meredith that owns People
Yes.
Entertainment Weekly?
Yeah, it was originally Time Inc., but we were acquired by Meredith.
Okay, so during your time there, digital audiences and revenue more than tripled. Can you take all the credit for that?
Yes.
Great. And then when you were at The Hollywood Reporter, you overhauled the digital newsroom. That drove up audience growth. So at what point did you discover that you had a knack for this side of the media industry? And what is the secret?
So it's funny because you were saying that you knew quite early on that you did not want to be, you didn't want to go into medicine or science, and yeah, I think I was telling you, but it's around 7th or 8th grade that I realized that, like, I am not going to this is not going to go well for me if I continue to try to pursue this medicine thing. And so I really, you know, and also, you know, mathematics, right? Just to be clear, you know. So even though there's a lot of numbers there, you cited a lot of numbers. It doesn't have anything to do with that so much. I think a lot of the success that the teams that I've worked with have had is really about understanding the importance of you know, data and really understanding that you have to have like the goalposts, right? And you have to set targets. I mean, I think for a long time, the media industry could just coast, right? Like, you know, you sent out the newspaper, you didn't really know if anybody read it, right? Broadcast television. Yeah, you had like Nielsen for a long time, but like actual consumption behavior and knowing things at a very granular level, you just didn't know. And so I think media generally got kind of lazy, you know, and just sort of let it happen. And then really what happened in the early 2000s when things became much more measurable, that's when certain parts of the media industry really embraced that, and then others, like the magazine business, did not. And I think that is something that just changed the course of media, and you see what's happening now, the disruption. I mean, let me give you an example. When I started in media in 1998, here are a few things that didn't exist. Facebook. Amazon was the place you bought books. The iPhone, right? Much less like, Twitter, TikTok, all the rest of it. These things didn't even exist, right? And so the challenge that, ultimately became so evident was that consumer consumption of media was going to change vastly, right? And the thing is that some people, again, figured it out, and other people did not. And I think I was really lucky because I entered the business at a time when you could take some chances and you could try things, but it all had to be data driven and data informed. And that was ultimately what helped me get ahead of it, because you still had people who weren't really who would sort of swat you away. And this is one of the things about being Korean American that I felt that I did often feel kind of othered in this effort, that they were like, oh yeah, the Asian guy will do the digital thing, like I was like an IT worker or something. Like it was in and that was really it gave me a lot of inspiration. Like, yeah, guess what? 5 years from now you'll thank me, right? And in some cases that happened. In some cases, it didn't go so well. But it was obviously from the times that it didn't necessarily go that well that we learned. So look, I think where we're at now, and things. Imagine how much transformation has happened literally in the last 10 years, much less 20 years. I think we are on the brink of yet another major transformation in the way people consume media, in the way that people are communicated to, and I think you just have to be ready for it. You just have to approach things with a very open mind and very just expect the unexpected. I think is something that I often talk to my teams about, right? Because who knows what the next thing will be.
So I have gone into the AP archives in New York, and it's so interesting. The people I consider my predecessors, the correspondents who covered the Korean War, they're all white men. And looking through the archives, super fascinating. Their old little dispatches of telex, pieces of paper that they would send through. It's history. But I remember and I've talked about this before, I was so shocked because one of the reports described the South Koreans as peasants. And I thought, he's going to turn over in his grave when he knows that one of those peasants is now running the AP Bureau in Seoul. And I have to tell you that, I don't talk about this often, but it was a hard journey. I had to become so tough. When I was in grad school at Columbia, one of my professors, who was, I think, the editor of Time, Ray Cave, let me just block that, delete that, I didn't say his name. But in one of my first pieces, he wrote, "You write well for somebody writing in their second language." Yeah. And I thought, and I boycotted his class after that, because I said, what makes you think, first of all, that I'm writing, but it really took a toll on my self-confidence. Because I was like, am I writing like somebody who doesn't write in fluent English? I mean, granted, maybe I'm not a great writer, but it took a while for me to get over that. And it also took some time for me to figure out what my path would be in journalism. Because the only examples I had were the traditional swashbuckling foreign correspondent, which is what I wanted to be.
Safari jacket.
Exactly. Yeah, and I love that. My grandfather was like that. But when it came time to to start this process of trying to open an office in North Korea, which no one had done, and no one has done since, they actually debated whether or not I was the right person. And I said, you put me in charge of Korea coverage, I am the right person. I had to lobby for the right to step into that role. And I had to think about, okay, I can't follow the path of any of these correspondents before me. I have to figure out what about me makes me unique and able to play this particular role. And it really is being Korean American. And I talk about this in the podcast, I think, in the Lazarus Heist, where I think I talk about the fact that the North Koreans were like, "Oh, your Korean is so bad. You're definitely not a spy for South Korea."
There's no way you could be a spy. Yeah, you do say that. That's amazing.
And so finding those ways where we can't model ourselves after the people who came before us.
Right.
I mean, maybe I hope that some of you can model yourselves after us. You know, we can play that role.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in the good ways, right? For sure. You know, I think it's amazing. By the way, if you haven't heard the Lazarus Heist, you should download it tonight.
I promise it's fun.
It's really fun. And you know, it's coming from someone who works for NPR. The music is amazing, and so you should talk about that as well. But so it's a really great story, and it weaves together a lot of things that happened at a very specific time. So it's a really interesting look into that particular moment. So definitely, it's great. You know, I think it's interesting when I think about sort of my personal, you know, my kind of personal journey as a Korean American. I often think back to the fact that my father, who was a translator for English missionaries in Korea, and so, you know, he worked really, really hard on his English. He and my mom put me in a lot of situations growing up in Decatur, Illinois, not exactly, you know, the diversity capital of, you know, the United States. Put me in a lot of situations that required me, that were very, very much about language and English. We didn't speak Korean in the home, which, you know, was unfortunate and is very unfortunate because I sound like a 4-month-old basically when I speak. But so I apologize.
Maybe 4 years. We'll
yeah, maybe. And no. And then you know, I did spelling bees. I did speech contests. You know, I did, you know, all these things that were very much about language. And I think part of it, it was almost like, I don't know if this is the right way to put it, but it was almost like my father was weaponizing English for me, right? And he was like, you're going to speak English as well as or better than these white people around us, right? And I think that is, so later in life, you know, particularly in a professional context, I did also put myself in a lot of situations where I was presenting to, you know, large audiences or, you know, writing, you know, position papers, whatever it is, right? To sort of to kind of flex that muscle, so that the people in the company, you know, weren't like, oh, that's the guy who does the math thing or the science thing or the, you know, whatever, right? Like it was very much about I can, you know, whatever you can do, I can do better in this respect. So you know, and I'm not being arrogant about it. I was just really, I think that from a mindset standpoint, that's kind of how I went into it, and I still feel like in some respects I you know, encounter that every day, you know. And communication has always been at the forefront and been really important to me in terms of how I present myself in a professional setting.
That's amazing. I think it's true that growing up Asian American, I think when I was growing up as well, we were really kept away from performative or communicative areas. I think the assumption was that as people who speak English as a second language, even though I was born in America, that wouldn't be a strength. Mm-hmm. And so it's funny because I was trained as a print journalist. Back when I started, you didn't have the option of doing all of it. You focused on one. Mm-hmm. So I never wanted to be in front of a camera or doing anything on the radio or in front of a camera. I never could have imagined that I would be sitting on a stage like I am now, often in front of the camera. Yeah. We were trained to do one form of journalism. Yeah. And so one of the things I tell my students and younger budding journalists is you got to learn it all. And you also, in high school, take theater classes. Take those kinds of classes because communication is everything. Actually, no matter what field you're in. Yeah. And that's something I think that a lot of us Asian Americans are kind of pushed away from, at least when I was growing up. Now, I did want to encourage people to ask some questions, so go ahead and line up. I think there's a mic there if you want to ask some questions. Otherwise, we're just going to keep chit-chatting.
Yeah, by all means, please. Yeah, it's an interesting, I don't really know what it was, but I like to joke that my parents, you know, didn't put me in, didn't really put me in team sports very intentionally, because they were like, yeah, don't let other people determine your fate. So just like the tennis, the golf, it was things that you did by yourself. But no, and I think there was a certain, we played the violin, and my sister's a professional musician now, so violinist now. So I think that there was a lot of, there actually was, in my case, a lot of like, get out there, learn how to be in front of, on a stage, in front of an audience, and so I think that did help me. But another thing I think that's really important is sort of the notion of, and going back to something I was saying, is, as you're saying, like mentorship, allyship, accompliship, and being, staying really close to the people within our organizations who are from a generation younger, or even several years younger, not necessarily a full generation, but really understanding how really giving those people a way to someone to talk to, someone to feel like there has been some lived experience that is shared. And I think that is something that's really important to me personally. And so, I try to seek it out. I definitely don't do as much as I could, but I think it is something that is incredibly important. And I'm sure you have mentored many journalists, over the years, and I think it's just incredibly important.
Yeah, it's one of the most satisfying things about being at this level. Somebody asked me recently who my mentors were, and I just drew a blank. There were literally no journalists for me to look up to who looked like me or followed my path. Yeah. And I remember even at the AP, we had a sort of a national meeting, and every single one of our bosses was blonde. And I felt like it was this club that I couldn't break into. And I think things have changed to defend the AP. Things have improved quite a lot. Yeah. But at the time, I remember thinking it was going to be a hard club to break into, because it is natural for people to hire people who are like them. And so it was very hard to imagine how I was going to break into that.
Yeah, and I think, I will say, I went to two high schools where there were very few Korean Americans. In fact, I went to high school in England for 2 years, and there were 2 Koreans out of like 1,260 boys. And so I think, and this may be getting into a bit of like armchair psychology here, but I think I got into a state where that assimilation, that sort of blunt assimilation, was just the norm for me, right? And so when I got into media, oddly, when I would go into a boardroom, or I'd sit in some some sort of mid to large size group, and I look around, I didn't see any Korean people, much less Asian people, much less Korean people. It wasn't like uncomfortable to me, right? It wasn't strange, right? And I think early in my career, I used to joke, just because of kind of where I went to school and where I grew up, like I was like sort of the ultimate white Anglo-Saxon Korean, right? I realized, like, and I think it was kind of a funny thing to say, and yet, over the course of time, I started to realize that I was both othering myself and like blunt assimilation. Like, so it was like on both sides, and so I've stopped using that joke. But it was that line, but it was definitely, I think something in about not, that lack of discomfort may have prevented me from, being more intentional about allyship and being more intentional about the trying to really galvanize my fellow Korean Americans. And I think, I'm really lucky to have this opportunity at NPR now, so that I can ignite more of that change.
Okay, so maybe we can get a CKA internship at NPR.
Yeah, I would love that.
Okay, so we have a question.
Chief People Officer sitting back there, so just taking that.
Hi, my name is Joshua Shin. I started journalism during COVID, actually, because it was a remote job, and I'm pretty happy to see that there are lots of Korean Americans involved in the field. Will, you mentioned something about, do you think that media online is going to take another turn? Not just into Facebook, which shaped a lot of digital media for the past like decade or so. It came out when I was like a freshman in college, so I saw the whole thing happen as an adult, right? Like, what do you think the next change or pivot in digital media, in journalism is going to be? As you know, like NPR, a lot of these traditional firms are taking a lot of cuts right now, and I think that you have, as the COO, or have a lot of insights on that. I have another question, but I'd like to go that first.
Yeah, I mean, so there's kind of a local and sort of a more tactical answer, which is, you know, there's a lot of technology happening now, augmented reality, metaverse, Web3, so, you know, sort of a more decentralized way of consuming media that I think will have an AI. I don't know if any of you have used ChatGPT, but it is scary. You know, and I think, but it could and can be used in a good way. It will be used in a lot of terrible ways, unfortunately. But so there's a lot of technology out there that I think will ultimately transform how we create media and then how we consume it, right? So on both sides of it. I think the larger question, though, is really comes down to sort of words versus images versus sounds, right? And sort of the ways, and not just formats, not like, is this an article, but like, what is the atomic unit of content ultimately, right? Because that has, our lives are so connected to devices right now. But, you know, there is gonna be a future not that far from now when, you know, this slab of steel and plastic in your hand really might not be the fundamental delivery system for content. And I think you know, that will continue to transform how what the actual, you know, the atomic unit of content is. And I think that's something that I think about a lot, and particularly with NPR, because NPR is a little bit different than working at a print outlet or at like a magazine outlet, because the core product is words on a page, right, or words on a screen. NPR, it's, you know, it's literally sounds going through the air. And so we got to think, like, how do we take that we do so well and translate it? Is it just putting words on a page? I don't think so, right? I think there is a different way for us to reach the consumer. And, you know, there is part of my job and a lot of us in media today where you have to be a bit of a futurist, right? And really think through what are the things what are the ways that we might be able to do things differently. So it's a good question, though, and it's one that I think about a lot.
A bit of a futurist, but also there's so much information being thrown at us now. And so in doing the podcast, I also have to think about, how do I get people's attention? I mean, there's the music, and the story behind that, as I told you, I wanted to make sure we had South Korean musicians. I would have loved North Korean musicians as well, but what I did was send my archive of North Korean music, which I bought in Pyongyang, to these South Korean musicians so they could kind of weave in a little bit of a North Korean sound. I mean, it's very controversial. People in the reviews will say, the music is so jarring. But with the podcast, I had to really distill it down to stories, find a way that people could connect. And I serve as a proxy, because I spent so much time living in North Korea, and we can't really have the voices of the North Koreans. So I serve as a proxy and tell my own stories as a way to get people interested on a very personal level in North Korea. So I think it's a little bit of both, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be really important for us when we think about how to capture people's attention going forward.
Yeah, that's incredibly hard. And like, if you think about where people consume and how they consume, you have such a short window of opportunity anymore. It's really, really hard. And so, you know, we've had the luxury at NPR of just being able to, you know, people turn on their radio in the morning. Well, guess what? Or they get in the car and they turn on the radio. Well, guess what? You know, they're not doing that so much anymore. So it's really, you know, I gave a talk at NYU recently, and I remember asking some of the students, you know, how many of you know the call letters of your local radio station? And they looked at me like, what's a radio station? Like, you know, like, so anyway, so I think it is a really massively transformational time right now. But that's what makes it fun. Sorry. Yeah, thanks, Josh.
Oh, hi. So I think you touched on this briefly, both of you. But do you have any advice for, I guess, aspiring journalists and like breaking into the industry, I guess?
Like yourself.
Yes.
I mean, I you know, Jean's a much more renowned journalist than I am, so I would cede to her first.
I mean, like I was saying earlier, I think it's important to learn all the formats, right? Because as Will is hinting, things are going to change going forward. I think that smartphones have done an incredible job in bringing back radio, because we can now travel with these devices. I think, and we haven't talked about that, the evolution of the industry, but it's also created a whole new world of podcasts. Video, I think, is something you're very interested in, but learning all of those, and really, it depends on what kind of journalist you want to be. For me, I would say if you want to go abroad, then learn languages, which is something I didn't do enough of, I think. But I think it's not the craft of journalism that we need to learn. It's about honing your curiosity, knowing what kind of questions to ask, listening to people's stories, recognizing that everybody has a fascinating personal story in every way. I mean, Julia, you did such a beautiful job in bringing your grandparents' story to life for us, and I think all of us were touched because we all have those family stories as well. So starting close to home as well. But in terms of the business side of it, I'm not sure, Naomi, what your ambitions are as a journalist. What is it that you hope to do? I'm curious.
I'm still thinking about it, but I think I would want to do something closer related to art or investigative journalism. Something I'm interested in.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point about Jean, your point about formats and where this lives and how it lives, right? I mean, we have this, we have over 1 million followers on our Planet Money TikTok channel, right? And what's interesting about that is it was just Jack Corbett, starting to do these videos where he explains certain things, and that's kind of explainer journalism, but it is good journalism, like it's well done, but it's in a completely different format. Like that is so different than some other kind of macroeconomic discussion on the air, but those two expressions can come from the same outlet, can come from the same company, and it's kind of important for us to keep cultivating. I mean, I keep saying like we need to go out and find 19-year-olds and 21-year-olds who want to be journalists and train them well, but also let them tell us how to reach people of their age. There's nothing sadder than a man my age trying to explain what our TikTok strategy is. Yeah. It's pathetic, right? So
it is also recognizing that instead of modeling yourself on journalists who've gone before you, who grew up in a very different industry, it's recognizing what you can bring to the table. What can you provide? What insight can you provide as somebody your age in your world?
Yeah, you can, like, the amazing thing about journalism or any kind of media now is that you can build your own brand, right? And you can build it. You can drive your own audience. In some cases, like less appealing ways than others, right? But I think you can really do it, and I think there is going to be a real class of journalists. You look at how many people are on Substack. You look at how many people are on, have their own outlets, right? And that is a really powerful thing. Their own podcasts.
But I am kind of a traditionalist in that I think that an internship in a newsroom, getting the basics of journalism is really important. When you sit in on morning meetings where they talk about the top stories of the day, you learn so much from that. So I think internships are very important. I keep talking about that. And also mentorship. I think that for me, I never knew when I was a college intern at the Korea Herald in South Korea that my boss, my supervisor, would be my mentor for life. He still checks in on me to find out. He's like, where's that book? He's still mentoring me. It's been, I don't know how many years, but I was a college junior. And I tell this to my students as well. And Christina, one of my students from Yonsei, I know she was here. Yeah, was Daslin one of your classmates? Daslin? So one of my students at Yonsei came up to me and said, how do I become a journalist? And I said, you find the right mentor. And she took a leave of absence and I basically trained her. She was my assistant for 1.5 years, and I taught her everything I knew. She did And I farmed her out to the Washington Post, to Sports Illustrated, everyone I could, Al Jazeera, so she get that internship experience, because it's very hard in South Korea to get a proper internship. She's now the star reporter for Korea issues at the Wall Street Journal.
That's amazing.
And so I did tell her it's not as important which institution you go to, but that you find somebody there who really cares about the path of your career, but also to get that newsroom experience.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for the question.
Thanks.
Hi, Will and Jean. Thank you so much for this conversation. I'm definitely an NPR baby, KMOX, St. Louis, Missouri. Grew up listening to it my whole life, against my will often. And I look like
That's what the captive audience.
Captive audience. My dad figured out how to pipe the radio into the entire house. So even in the bathroom, it was everywhere. But I saw in your job, it seemed like you're kind of in a transformational role, which has, I can imagine, a lot of challenges with it. And I feel like I've been following from a distance, like how does NPR go from radio to podcast, and some things seem to have worked really well, and some things seem to have been, wait, it's here now it's there, how do I find the show? Like, what has been some of the internal challenges that maybe you've experienced, that the organization has experienced doing this kind of disruptive thing that I feel like is happening in public media? I don't know how long you've been there, if you've kind of come up against that, and I often know that people of color are the disruptives that kind of come in to change places, and the baggage that brings. I hear your colleagues brings with it. But I would just, any insights, you don't have to tell all the stories, but any insights to that?
No, so I've been at NPR about 10 months now. So as I said, speaking of babies, I mean, in public media, people do work in public media for a very long time, and so I'm very, very young, if you will, in the public media universe. And I think the thing about about NPR and about public media that is important to remember is that it's about, NPR was started in 1970. For most of its existence, probably say literally 43 years, basically no competition, right? Just no one did what NPR does. And then with the advent of podcasting, which, basically an invention of NPR and subsequent public media colleagues, everyone started to, more people started to be able to do it, right? We had the airwaves, we had the frequencies, and no one, you just couldn't get on the air. So with the advent of podcasting, though, whether now today, the competition is Amazon. It's Spotify, it's Apple. I mean, it's literally the largest tech companies in the world are our competition. And the challenge is that we simply don't have as much money as they do. So we have to be much more nimble, much more creative, and ultimately have to kind of take some bigger swings, right? And so there's a lot that we're working on now. We're embarked on a strategy process now to really think about who do we want to be, right, in the future, and where do we want to play? How do we win? What will it take to get there? And I think that this is the moment for NPR and the entire what we call the NPR network, so all of our stations, to really take our place in capturing the American public's attention. For instance, we have, across the country, we have over 3,000 journalists in newsrooms. And in some cases, the newsrooms in Colorado and the newsrooms in Oregon, the NPR station has the biggest newsroom in that state, which tells you a little bit about the newspaper business. It's very sad. But there is an opportunity now for NPR and its network to really be the most important local, national, international news provider, apologies to the AP, in the world. And I think that's a huge opportunity, but we have to take it. Like, we can't just let it happen. It's not just going to happen. We have to capture that. So that's a really big one. In terms of the transformation piece, we actually have a team at NPR called Change Management and Transformation, and that team helps the rest of the organization to navigate some of this. But you know, I have sort of a mantra in my head when I'm thinking about. You mentioned the people of color being change agents, and I think that yes, that is true. You know, and it is important that we take that you know responsibility, because if not us, who? If not now, when? And then beyond that, but do it in a way that isn't, you know, when you say change agent or when you say transformation, there's often this sort of frisson of, you know, of hostility, right, or friction. You know, and I think that you can do transformation and you can be a change agent, and you can do, but you don't have to be, you don't have to be, you know, frankly, you don't have to be an asshole to do it, right? I often tell myself, and this is what I tell my little kid, you know, before I put him to bed, because I believe it, you have to be brave, right? You have to really, you know, put yourself out there and try things and be very, very courageous. You have to be curious, right? You have to ask questions and not make assumptions about what the transformation is. And then, kind of most importantly, you have to be kind, right? Because nobody, you have to have the empathy and lead with empathy. I mean, Satya Nadella, who is the CEO of Microsoft, wrote this fantastic book about leading with empathy and how that really transformed Microsoft to take it from where it was as a, you know, software giant to the, you know, massive, essentially, media company that it is today. You should read it. I think it's about, you know, being brave, being curious, and being kind. And I think if you can do that and apply that mantra, you know, that helps a lot when it comes to the transformation narrative and the transformation task.
So I think we have time for one more question, and then we're going to wrap things up.
Hi, thank you for sharing. I am also an aspiring journalist after realizing that law school was just for my parents. But I was wondering, breaking into an industry that, you know, you didn't have mentors or role models who were Korean, who didn't look like you, did you feel often that you had a responsibility to represent a newer collective? Is there a responsibility? Do you think as journalists, do you think as CEO of NPR, you are responsible for representing a underrepresented voice? Do you feel that responsibility? How do you navigate it? Or is it impossible to do so, given that, you know, we're not a monolith?
It's a good question. So in my case, and Jean, I'd love to hear your take on this, because I got really lucky, actually. As I said, my first boss was Korean American, right? And you know, in fact, one of Albert's best friends from high school was Chang Rae Lee, the author, the novelist, and so I had, and that was right around the time Native Speaker came out in the late '90s, and so I felt very, very, very comforted by that. In terms of sort of the responsibility. Yes, of course. I feel immense responsibility to, you know, to build strength through mentorship, allyship, again, accompliceship, and be a force for good, right? And I think that, you know, the world that my 16-month-old kid lives in has to look very different in terms of opportunity, right? And he has to feel that, you know, many more things are open to him than I did. However, you know, I do think, and this is something that we talk about in NPR, it has to be all of us, right? It can't just be the Korean American person who's like championing Korean Americans. Our colleagues, white, black, you know, Latino, like whatever it is, they have to be part of this. And so I think it ultimately, it really, really sits with the culture of an organization. And I think that, in some respects, is more important for me to help build with the help of, you know, my colleagues than simply being the one guy who's like, oh, I'm going to hire more Korean Americans, I'm going to hire more Korean Americans. You have to get it into the water supply, right? And I think that if we do that, then we're much better served than simply being the one person, you know, on a soapbox. But you must have, I mean, a very different perspective.
Maybe not different, but I would say that my early passion in journalism was to give voice to communities that were not represented. And so I focused in journalism school in race and immigration reporting, and I made sure that I was writing about communities of all different stripes, especially in California. So my big goal was to go to California. I remember one of the stories I wrote was I interviewed a docent or a guide at Angel Island who had been detained there at Angel Island. So a Chinese American who could tell us very personally what that place meant to him. I wrote about Hmong farmers to kind of explain the history of the Hmong migration, Mexican day laborers. So really trying to expand the diversity of stories in mainstream media, because the AP is very mainstream, goes to every newspaper in the country, every TV station, every radio station. I really struggled because it was hard to be the only one at the AP. And there were times when I thought, I really want to go to a more ethnic, friendly organization. But I stuck with it because I thought I could have more impact within a mainstream organization writing stories about Asian Americans. And I was going to say that the Virginia Tech, I was sent from London, I was posted to London, I was sent to cover the Virginia Tech massacre, because the AP didn't have a single Korean or Korean American journalist except for me. So they sent me from London to cover it. And I remember wanting to make sure that I was representing what the issues were for the Korean American community, the concerns, what his journey must have been like, what kind of questions we were having. I approached North Korea from the same vein, that this is a country where the people have no voice. How do we explore North Korea from that perspective as well, as a community that we should better understand? And so that's still what I'm trying to do.
That's amazing. Well, yeah, I see Abe approaching the podium, but I want to invite any of you in this room who would like to come to NPR. Maybe we'll organize some kind of tour, and just encourage you to to come and see us and support your public radio station.
I was going to ask that. What do we need to do as consumers? This is his moment to subscribe and support public radio, because it is so essential. Okay, that's our little commercial.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, Will. It's been so much fun to talk to you.
You.
You and I
It's
could
been
talk
great.
forever.
I know.
I think we have so much in common.
Seriously, yeah, absolutely.
I hope that all of you found it interesting to get this slice of the business side of NPR and media and your journey. I want to thank the Council of Korean Americans, Abe and Linda, for organizing this, and to all of you for coming tonight. Yeah. Thank you. Stay in touch with us.
This is awesome. Thank you so much, everybody.